Welcome back to the homestead. Today we're going to pressure can beef. So we've bought 3 beef roasts at our local supermarket. These were on sale for $2.98 a pound. We really enjoy the canned beef. It comes out almost like a shredded meat once it's done being pressure canned. So we're going to show you the process of how to do that today. We're using as a guide our pressure canner book that came with our Presto pressure canner. And in there is a recipe for canning meat. So we're going to turn and find the pressure canning beef. Cut up meat, so strips, cubes, or chunks of bear, beef, pork, lamb, veal, or venison. We are going to do the raw pack, so we're going to fill the jars with raw meat pieces, leaving 1 inch of headspace. We are not adding any liquid. We want to remove the air bubbles as well as possible, and then adjust our 2-piece lids. We're going to process at 11 pounds of pressure for 75 minutes because we are doing pints. So that's our directions. It's very, very simple to can meat. I know for some people it seems very intimidating. It definitely was for me initially, but now that I've done it a few times, it's extremely easy and it's very tasty. So let's get the meat cubed up and into jars, and we'll walk you along with the rest of the canning process. When you're pressure canning meats, you do want your jars to be clean. They don't actually have to be sterilized. When you put them in the pressure canner for as long as they'll be in there, it's going to take care of the whole sterilization process. So these are just clean, freshly washed jars. Ball used to recommend that you heat your lids. They no longer actually recommend that. So we're going to be using our lids straight out of the package as they now recommend, which does make the process even easier. We'll be trimming the excess fat off of our meat because that will help it to can better, and it is more appealing to eat if it's not covered in fat. And we'll be able to use all of these beef scraps. You could use them to make broth, but in our case this time, because we have a lot going on, we are just going to feed these to the chickens. Chickens are omnivores and they enjoy eating all sorts of meat. We don't feed our chickens chicken. Some people do, but a personal preference for us, we do not. If you use your canning funnel, that will help make sure that you keep the top edge of your jar clean, so you should be filling the jar using the canning funnel, not doing like I did over there. So I'm going to cut up a bunch of this meat and we'll bring you back when we're ready to start putting jars into the pressure canner. Ryan is finishing cubing up the last of our meat. We generally cube this into approximately 1 inch chunks. That's a nice size for reusing later, and that is what's recommended in our canning book. So we do that just as you can see here, in 1-inch cubes. You want 1 inch of headspace on your jars. So that is to this bottom line right here. As we said earlier, you want to try and get as much airspace out of those as possible, but you don't want to pack the meat hard. You just want to get it in there pretty snug. Each jar will hold about 1 pound of raw meat. So in our case, we had 11 pounds of roast total, and we will get between 11 and 12 jars out of that. Our canner actually holds 16, so I probably should have bought another roast so that we could have rounded it out a little bit better to more efficiently use our resources, but that's okay. We're going to do just the 11 jars that we have. Okay, so here is the inside of our Presto pressure canner. I have added water. When you're pressure canning, you actually don't use very much water at all. The recommendation on this is to fill it to the first line, which is all the way down there, which means that we have about 1.5 inches of water in the bottom of the canner. We're going to go ahead and prepare our jars. So because this is a meat product, it has oils in it. So we want to wipe our jar rims down with just standard household white vinegar. That will cut any of the fats, and it'll help to ensure that we get a proper seal on our jars. Ideally, you want to make sure you're being extremely careful when you're initially filling your jars to not get any meat on the edges. But even if you're confident that you didn't, you still need to do this step just to double check and make sure. The last thing you want is for all your hard work to go to waste and have your food spoil because a jar lid didn't seal properly. We are using ball, wide mouth, Shore-Tight lids. So we've got our stack of them here. When you're putting on your lids, you want to make sure that they're well centered on your jar. And then when you snug this down, you want it fairly snug, but you don't want to just like crank it as tight as you can. But it should be on there pretty firmly. So we'll get these lidded up, and we'll bring you back when we're putting them into the canner. When you're placing your jars into the canner, whenever possible, you want to make sure that you're putting them offset to each other so you don't have them setting directly on top of the lid of another jar. If you're doing a full canner load, that's not as easy to do. If you're using the center ones, they're going to have to basically sit on top of each other. So we're going to turn this up to a fairly high setting, medium high, and remove the weight from our canner and go ahead and put our lid on and allow this to come up to temperature. So once this is getting close to ready to start our timing, we're going to see a vent of steam start to come up out of this, and it'll be pretty evident that it is steaming. Once that starts, we'll set the timer for 10 minutes. And after that 10 minutes is when we put on our canner weight, which goes on there just like that. And then we have to wait for this to come up to 11 pounds of pressure. And after it reaches 11 pounds of pressure, that's when our 75 minutes of canning time actually begins. So we'll bring you back when we start seeing steam out of this to show you what that looks like. All right, so hopefully you can see it on camera, but that vent is steaming nicely. So we're going to go ahead and put our weight on. And we should fairly shortly see our pressure gauge start to rise. And usually it takes a decent while to come up to 11 pounds. We're gonna go ahead and leave our heat on medium-high for now. And as it gets closer to 11 pounds, we will go ahead and turn that down. We also have this pressure release valve, which before very long will pop up, and then it'll start to build pressure. We have now heated our pressure canner to 11 pounds with the weight on it. We're going to start our timer for 75 minutes, and we'll bring you back once that 75 minutes of pressure at 11 pounds is up. Our canner has now been at 11 pounds for 75 minutes. So we've got 18 seconds left on the timer. We're going to go ahead and turn the heat off on our stove. We're going to leave the canner as it is. We're going to leave the weight on it. We can take the weight off once this goes down. After that happens, once we remove the weight, we'll have to wait a full 10 minutes to make sure that the canner is completely depressurized before we take our jars out. So we'll bring you back when we're ready to take out the jars. Our canner is depressurized. We've removed the lid. When you do remove the lid, make sure that you open it and tip it back towards you so that it's opening away from you to allow the steam to escape away from you for safety. So we're going to remove our jars from the canner. You can already hear some of them are sealing. Spidey, go on, get out of the kitchen, go. You should be careful not to do this with a dog underfoot, because if one of the jars were to break, they are, of course, loaded with boiling hot liquid. So there is 11 jars of beef canned. You can see that liquid is still boiling inside of those. They should all seal up here fairly shortly, and we'll hear those pop, pop, pops like you were hearing earlier from each of the jars. If you look in, you can see that our water is very clean, so nothing boiled over in there. That's good, that's what you want. And we have this jar of beef. This is one that we have canned. This was done last fall. And we're going to have this for supper tonight. And we'll show you the nachos that we make using this beef. Here are our finished cooled jars. They did all seal successfully. There's no flex to the lid, so that means that they are sealed. This is the jar that we've had on the shelf for about 6 months now. And I'm just going to go ahead and open that up and pull out a piece of the meat to show you. And we might let the dog have a little sample because she is down here anxiously awaiting. So you can hear that noise that it makes where it's sucking in air. That means that it had an excellent seal. This is definitely safe to eat. You'll see the beef on top looks just a little bit dry, and that's because it was not down in the liquid. That's not a problem. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And you can see how nice and easily this flakes apart. So it's perfect to use if you want to make a quick stew or for some quick teriyaki, or in the case of tonight, we're doing nachos with it. So let's let Spritey have a little taste, and then we're gonna head off and have some dinner. She thinks it's delicious, and we do too. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.